The following week, Scarlett felt humiliated knowing she had to go to a man's house to be traded for a debt. But since she had no way of helping her parents financially, she had no choice. When they arrived at Henry's house this time, Henry was present, sitting beside his parents. After introductions, his mother studied Scarlett and said, "She's not bad for a daughter-in-law." Henry scoffed and leaned back in his chair. "Mom, how can you say that? This thing isn't worth my time. Even my bed warmers are prettier than her." He turned to Scarlett and her family, his gaze filled with disgust as he continued. "And the fact that her poverty-stricken family is offering her up like this makes the whole thing even worse. She's not worthy of being my wife. I don't need her." Scarlett's parents felt the weight of embarrassment crushing them. Scarlett lowered her head, biting her nails, as a single tear slipped down her cheek. If only she had the money to pay off their debt. If only her credit score was good enough to get another loan, she wouldn't hesitate for a second. Henry's mother sighed and said, "Henry, listen. The overly beautiful wives you like will never have time for you, even if they don't work and have housemaids attending to their every need. They'll be too busy flaunting themselves on social media." But women like Scarlett make the best wives and mothers. They wake up at 3 a.m. to prepare for the day, take care of the house, and go to work. They don't have time for distractions. Even if they make videos, they won't post them because they would be too afraid of people judging their looks. So marry her. She would be a good wife. Scarlett's parents stared at Henry's mother in shock. Scarlett bit her nails harder. Henry's father nodded and added, "Your mother is right, Henry. Marry her." Then he turned to Scarlett and said, "Now that we're forcing my son to choose you, tell me, will you, as his wife, be ready to wake up early and make sure everything in his house runs perfectly without help? My son's house is much bigger than this one we are in. Will you give us as many healthy grandchildren as we want? Additionally, don't think that because you are getting married to a wealthy family, you would stop working. No, we can provide your meals, but aside that we expect you to keep your job because you'll need to work to support your personal expenses, as we cannot have a jobless daughter-in-law. Will you have sufficient energy to balance work and family responsibilities?" Scarlett pulled her hand away from her mouth and was about to reply when her father spoke up. "I am so sorry, sir, but I am not comfortable with your expectations. You're saying my daughter should keep her job and at the same time be solely responsible for managing such a large house. That's unfair and borders on slavery. You mentioned that your son's house is bigger than this one, yet your wife has domestic workers. You won't even consider allowing my daughter to have part-time help, perhaps someone who could come once a week to deep clean the house and cut the grass. It seems you want her to be a baby factory, producing multiple children without any support. To make the matters worse, you want to make all the decisions for them without her having a say, which is very bad." Henry's father let out a laugh. "It's not by force to exchange your daughter for your debt, Mr. Man. If you don't like the conditions, pay back my money and leave here with your daughter. Or do you think you can compare your daughter to my wife?" His voice turned sharp as he continued. "You failed to pay your debt. You brought an offer, we accepted, and we're setting our terms. Then you're complaining. Who do you think you are?" Scarlett's father clenched his fists, about to respond, but before he could, Scarlett quickly spoke. "Dad, please don't say anything else." Then she turned to Henry's parents. "I'll do it. I'll marry your son under your conditions." Henry's mother clapped her hands together and said, "Good, since both sides agree, the wedding will be next month. Let's exchange phone numbers." She turned to Scarlett's parents and continued, "Send me your daughter's bride price list on WhatsApp. Just because you're trading your daughter doesn't mean we won't do things properly. But let's keep it simple. Only 100 guests. 75 from our side, 25 from yours. We'll cover all the food and drinks, the outfits for you and your guests, and even the money you and your guests would spray during the wedding. But be warned, there will be CCTV cameras watching. If any of your guests try to pocket the money instead of spending it, they'll regret it." She turned to Scarlett. "Send me your measurements on WhatsApp so I can buy your wedding dress." After they did, all she requested, Scarlet's father cleared his throat and asked, "Can we leave now?" Henry's father waved them off. "Of course you can." They stood up and left. The moment they stepped into their house, they broke down and cried themselves to sleep. For the next 2 weeks, they did everything they could to gather the money and pay off the loan so they could cancel the wedding. But every effort failed. With no other choice, they accepted their fate and hoped, prayed, that somehow Henry and his family would treat Scarlet better over time. On the wedding's day, true to their word, Henry's parents provided everything for the wedding. Scarlet's parents, however, were not shameless enough to invite outsiders. They only invited close family and friends. They warned them to please behave themselves. No one wanted to draw unnecessary attention, so the atmosphere was tense, with everyone walking on eggshells.
Promises broken, dreams betrayed, married off where love decayed. Death's cruel burden, heavy lies. In her eyes, the silent cries. Shattered hearts and whispered screams, living in these tortured dreams. Her soul cries for what was right. Scarlet's fire dimmed by night.
5 days after the wedding, Henry started bringing different concubines home almost every day, treating his home like a hotel. Each time, he would order Scarlet to cook for them. Scarlet obeyed without complaint. Sometimes he would wake her up at dawn, just when she needed to get ready for work. She would rush to the kitchen, cook for his mistresses, then end up being late for work and be scolded by her boss. Other times, after long, exhausting hours at the office, she would come home, hoping to rest, only for Henry to summon her into the kitchen again. She endured it all. For an entire month, she swallowed her pride, forcing herself to accept her miserable reality. One evening, Henry walked into the house with yet another mistress. The woman sat beside him in the living room, crossing her legs like she owned the place. Henry leaned back on the couch and called out, "Scarlet, come here." Scarlet came out from her bedroom with a blank face. Henry gestured toward the woman beside him. "This is my babe. I want you to cook for her." Then he turned to his mistress. "Babe, what would you like her to prepare?" The woman smirked and shrugged. "Anything is fine, babe." Henry nodded in satisfaction and looked back at Scarlet. "You heard her, right? She said anything is fine." Scarlet folded her arms and replied, "If anything is fine, she can go to the kitchen and cook it herself." The room went silent. Scarlet's voice rose. "Why should I be the one cooking for your mistresses all the time? I'm tired, and I won't do it anymore." Henry scoffed and leaned forward. "You must be kidding, right? Or have you forgotten that you are not a real wife in this house? Have you forgotten that your useless parents couldn't pay back their debt and sold you to my family as repayment? Now you have the nerve to refuse my orders." Scarlet let out a bitter laugh. Her heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "Don't you ever call my parents useless again," she continued with her shaking voice. "Yes, I was brought here as a replacement for my parents' debt. Your parents begged you before you finally accepted to make me your unloved wife. I agreed to do all the house chores alone and still keep my job. I agreed to give your parents as many healthy grandchildren as they want, but nowhere in the agreement did it say I would be cooking for your mistresses." Henry's face darkened. "Enough of your ranting and emotional manipulation. You and your parents signed the agreement to do everything my parents and I want with your eyes wide open. Now stop wasting my time and get into that kitchen." Scarlet squared her shoulders. "Come and drag me there yourself." She turned and started walking toward her room, but Henry lunged at her like a wild beast. He raised his fist and punched, slapped, and kicked her without mercy. Scarlet hit the floor, yet he didn't stop. He kept beating her until she could barely move, until she could barely breathe. When he was finally done, she lay there, bruised and broken. Her body trembled in pain. With the last ounce of her strength, She crawled toward her room and dragged her suitcase across the floor. She stuffed in whatever she could find, not even bothering to fold her clothes. Then, without another word, without another glance at the man who had shattered her spirit, she walked out of the house and left to her parents' house. Inside the bus, on her way to her parents' house, she thought about the kind of life she had always prayed for. She imagined the kind of man she wanted as her husband, and how they would spend their days together, going to the beach, cooking, praying, eating, watching movies, and building a beautiful home filled with lovely kids. But life had other plans for her by letting her get married to cruel Henry.
Here's the love she was dreaming of. Spite and spite, it's never enough. In the dark her heart does weep, in a marriage that cuts so deep. Gold became her cage of dread, silent screams inside her head. His cruel words, they scar her soul. In this life she'll never feel whole. Where is the love she was dreaming of? Spite and spite, it's never enough. Promises were broken chains, and in silence she endures the pain. Where is the love she was dreaming of? Spite and spite, it's never enough. In the dark
When Scarlett arrived at her parents' house and explained everything to her parents, they were horrified by the bruises covering her face. Her mother gasped and rushed to her side, while her father clenched his fists in silent fury. They knew their daughter's marriage was forced marriage, but never had they imagined that Henry would turn into a violent husband. No matter what she had done, nothing justified him beating her like this. But what could they do to him? Absolutely nothing. All they could do was to treat her wounds by applying ointment and whispered words of comfort as Scarlett winced in pain. Minutes later, Scarlett's mother's phone rang. She hesitated before answering because it was Henry's mother. She finally picked it up and put the call on loudspeaker. "Hello," Henry's mother's voice rang out, sharp and unapologetic. "I heard my son scolded your daughter because she did something bad, and instead of changing her ways, she packed up and left her husband's house. Is that how you raised her?" Scarlett's mother felt her hands shaking with rage. But before she could respond, Henry's mother continued, "Anyway, I don't have much to say. If your daughter wants to abandon her marriage after just 1 month, that's fine. But you must return the money you borrowed from my husband, immediately. Also, you need to repay every single dime we spent on the wedding." Scarlett's mother's eyes widened. "All the money you spent on the wedding?" Henry's mother scoffed. "I believe you heard me well. Or do you think we would spend so much on the wedding only for your daughter to walk away a month later? You wouldn't have to pay it back if this marriage had been out of love. But since you came to us begging to use your daughter as repayment for your debt, we won't take this loss. I'll send you the total amount we spent on the wedding along with my bank details." She paused for a moment, then added coldly, "We will deduct 2% from the amount you owe my husband as payment for the time your daughter worked in my son's house. However, the remaining balance must be paid in full." Before Scarlett's mother could protest, the call ended. Scarlett's mother gritted her teeth, tapping her foot on the floor aggressively. "Problem! Problem! Problem!" she cried out in frustration. "Who should we turn to? How do we escape this mess?" Scarlett burst into tears and whispered, "Mom, Dad, let's run away. Please, let's just leave this place." Her father looked up, his red, tired eyes filled with despair. "I won't say I'm against running away, but where do we go? We have no money for transportation, no place to stay, and no food to survive on." Scarlett quickly wiped her tears and said, "Don't worry, Dad. I have some cash with me. Let me help you pack your bags. We can leave tonight." Her parents looked at her in shock. She cleared the shocked look on their faces as she said, "I have a friend who works as a boatman. He can help us leave without a visa or passport. We'll go to a neighboring country and get a cheap guest house. Once we find jobs, we'll save up to rent a house." Scarlett's father clenched his jaw. "But what about our house? Our shop?" Scarlett whispered. "Dad, Henry's parents already have the documents. Let them sell them. Once we've settled down and made enough money, we'll come back. We'll repay whatever remains of the debt and buy back our home and shop." A heavy silence fell between them. Then, Scarlett's father took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do it." At night, they had taken out their bags and were closing up their house when they heard someone call out, "Scarlett!" They all turned back and froze as they saw Henry standing and looking at them with a menacing gaze. His lips curled into a cruel smirk as he took a step forward. "Going somewhere?"